Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being with us this evening. I am excited to be here. My name is Steve Knight. I am the Director of Marketing and Sales for Chalice Press. And it is my honor and privilege to be in conversation this evening with these two brilliant academics and authors and bloggers, Kendra Weddle Irons and Melanie Springer Mock. Let me just give a brief introduction, and then I will turn it over to you two to introduce yourselves and fill in all the rest of the story. But Kendra teaches religion and humanities at Texas Wesleyan University in Fort Worth, Texas, and Melanie is professor of English at George Fox University in Newberg, Oregon, where you are together this evening. Hanging out, and looks like you're having a good time. And thank you for the next hour in conversation here with us. Kendra and Melanie, tell us a little bit more about yourselves.
Well, we met about 13 years ago when I moved here to start teaching at George Fox University, and Melanie was already here. I was part of the English department. And during the time that I was here, we started meeting with a couple other people in a writing group. And over the years, kind of developed a really terrific friendship. And then when I moved away and went to Texas, we continued that friendship. And then eventually kind of it worked itself out into this book. So it's a little bit of the shared background we have.
Right. Did you also want a little bit of our own background, or? Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about some of the other work that you've done and kind of about the kind of things that you are teaching and your background.
Well, Kendra is the religion scholar of our duo, and I am a writer who doesn't know as much about religion, so I think that's a good balance with each other. I teach in the Department of English and teach journalism classes, creative nonfiction classes. My dissertation was actually in memoir and life writing for Mennonite conscientious objectors, and that was my first book that was published in 2003. So most of my written work is in creative nonfiction and feature writing. I also advise the school newspaper here and serve as the associate director for the Writing Center at George Fox University. So like most small college professors, I wear a lot of different hats and don't really specialize much in any one thing.
And as a professor of religion, I often get to teach introductions to Bible courses. And so part of my interest in writing about the Bible came about when I was teaching a course here at George Fox University called Women and the Bible. And so I did that for several semesters. And so some of the insights that we share in the book come out of that class in particular. I also frequently teach courses in world religions and also ethics. So like Melanie, I wear lots of different hats and teaching a wide variety of subjects.
And the two of you have been blogging together for a while. How long has that been? And how did the idea for that blog come about?
Well, we were just figuring that out together, and we started blogging in 2011. It's hard to believe it's been 5 years of blogging together. We were meeting each other at a conference in Indianapolis for Christian Feminism Today. And after the conference, we were just sitting poolside thinking about what kind of writing project we could do together, and we dreamed up a blog together. And so we started that in the summer of 2011. And, you know, time passes very quickly. So now it's been 5 years continuing to blog when we can.
That's great. And it's called the Ain't I a Woman blog.
Right.
And that eventually led you to this, which is the book, If Eve Only Knew, freeing
Right.
yourself from biblical womanhood and becoming all God means for you to be, which is now the combination of the writing and the theology came together beautifully. When did this start percolating?
I think about a year into our blogging, we felt like we were just uncovering more and more and more messages that our young adult students were receiving from Christian popular culture about what it meant to be a biblical woman, supposed biblical woman. And we just realized we were uncovering more and more stuff, and it felt like we had enough material to write a book, and that would be a great way to get the message out to people that the Christian popular culture can be really damaging to young people, both men and women, and limiting them from becoming who we think God needs for them to be. So I think maybe 1 or 2 years into blogging, we started thinking and dreaming about what a book would look like.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting, and I appreciate. It sounds like really that sense of concern for your students of saying there need to be more resources available to help people navigate this world and kind of some of the damaging messages that are coming about. Do you both sense sort of there's an urgency to that message right now, as you know, what is happening in Christian popular culture that people need some help to navigate?
I think we do, and I think part of the reason is because of the just widespread use of social media, and so the ability for these messages to get out and kind of cross-pollinate is quite remarkable. And at the same time that people are being kind of bombarded with these messages in various different places, there's also, I think, kind of an increased biblical illiteracy. And so these two things together kind of mean that, people don't know how to parse these messages. And so I think what happens is that if this is what they hear, then this is what they believe. And so if there isn't kind of a counter message, an invitation to see and understand the Bible differently, then I think these damaging messages kind of hold sway. And people tend to just adopt those as opposed to really knowing what the Bible might say about any one of those things. Right.
I've heard this a few times recently, so I'd be curious to kind of maybe investigate this idea of biblical illiteracy a little bit further with you, Kendra, as the religion scholar. Why do you think that is, or do you think that's just do you think that's been the case for a while, or do you think that's increasing?
I think maybe both. Just from my own teaching over the course of, I don't know, probably about 15 years. So this is just anecdotal, but I can remember that when I first started teaching, an introduction to the Old Testament or an introduction to the New Testament, I could reference certain stories. I could mention the name Moses and Abraham, and I could even mention some women. I could mention Ruth, and people would know the story. They would know the plot. And so then we could start from there and be able to kind of work with the narrative. Now, what I find is that I have to start at the very beginning, and that my students just do not know these narratives. And so that's just anecdotal evidence, but that has been my experience. And I'm not sure why that is, although I have a hunch that kind of in this era when so many of the churches have kind of become much more maybe dedicated to getting lots of people in the door.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of looked to ways of entertaining that perhaps we've lost some of the biblical training in lieu of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I suppose that may be part of it.
Right. And if I may be so bold to suggest, would you agree maybe on both ends of the spectrum, as more liberal mainline churches go further in the other direction? So there's sort of a polarization, perhaps folks growing up on both, in kind of both settings, getting less and less of that biblical education and foundation. Right. Yeah.
Right. I think that's true. That, in some of the more mainline progressive churches, the tendency often is to focus perhaps so much on social justice that kind of understanding the biblical connection to that gets lost in the midst. So I think you're right. You kind of have people moving to both ends. And that was part of why we wanted to write this book too, was, to be able to build a bridge so that, people who are in evangelical culture understand perhaps the Bible a little more contextually, but also that people, maybe particularly progressive Christians who are maybe less familiar with evangelical culture, might learn from it and then be able to talk with evangelicals, so that there could be more bridge building among Christian groups themselves instead of this polarization.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of that evangelical culture a little bit. I grew up evangelical, and so, but even some of the more recent stuff, like Proverbs 31 ministries, is even sort of new to me, because I feel like maybe there are some post-evangelical folks felt like we kind of got kicked out of the evangelical world. For folks who might not be familiar, what is that all about, and what have you tried to do in the book to challenge this particular theology, this Proverbs 31 woman kind of idea?
Well, when we were talking about starting our blog, I remember the first blog post I wrote was about a Proverbs 31 doll, which was a doll that Christian families could give to their daughters to help them learn about caring for potential spouses in the future, learning how to clean the house. There were recipes so that the child could bake alongside the doll for other family members, and being really shocked myself that the indoctrination about Proverbs 31 would start so young with children. That was like the tip of the iceberg. And we have just found an overwhelming amount of artifacts that try to teach women to become like a supposed Proverbs 31 woman. And they've even changed that, or evangelical culture has changed that to be the Proverbs 31 wife. And she is like the consummate woman who takes care of her children. She takes care of her husband. She does work, but not work outside the home, because any good Christian woman obviously would never work outside the home. She does work within her home to raise money for her family. And there's all kinds of messages in Christian culture that this is what women should aspire to be, is this woman who does everything for everybody else. But as we look into the message of Proverbs 31, and Kendra does a beautiful job in the book of considering what Proverbs 31 really is, and how Christian culture has co-opted that to try to sell women a bill of goods, both literally and figuratively, both in terms of all the things that women can buy that are Proverbs 31 branded, but also in terms of making us believe that we should be exactly like this model that none of us can ever achieve.
Mm.
And I think part of our concern about things like the Proverbs 31 woman is that this is really an example of groups making large amounts of money off of a particular message. And so that's one piece, is kind of this commodification of, you know, certain aspects. And then the other piece is that it's really twisting scripture to say something that we think it doesn't actually say. And so, you know, those things are really problematic. And so we wanted to address that.
Yeah. I appreciate what you just said a minute ago about bridging and basically helping to translate, or speaking to both the evangelical audience and the mainline Protestant audience, my more progressive friends who look at sort of this evangelical culture and they just shake their head. Because they don't understand it. They just think it's ridiculous. And so, yeah, helping to translate, helping to people understand where some of this stuff is coming from and the significance of it. Like you said, it's in many cases, it's become a big industry. And is that, I mean, is that part of the reason for it? I mean, you sort of have to simplify a message, right, to get it to be, like you said, commodified and packaged and sold.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so then you take all of the nuance out of the Bible, right? And you just boil it down to some small thing that then you can package and sell. You know, and I don't know, like for me, walking into a Barnes and Noble or any other bookstore and seeing, for example, just scads of different Bibles that are marketed to particular niches, you know, the Princess Bible, for example, you know, I just think that's really twisting the Bible and using it in a way that I don't think really is treating it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It seems actually kind of contradictory that a lot of evangelicals talk about the inerrant Word of God and the Word of God is unchanging, but then they're willing to change the Bible to make a Princess Bible or a Warrior Bible to market it to young people. In fact, when we speak to groups, that's one of the things that groups are most shocked by, for some reason, is that there are all these different types of Bibles marketed to young people that are Princess Bibles or Warrior Bibles and have very different messages. And the Princess Bibles often include like a tiara that a girl can put on as she's reading her Bible. And the Bible will have makeup tips inside of it and tips for how they can serve others. So those are being marketed to people at a very young age, and begin those gendered messages at a very young age too. And if a child is hearing that the Word is perfect and unchanging, and then is given a Princess Bible, that entrenches those messages even more deeply.
Right. Wow. Is the Princess Bible the most shocking thing that you came across in your research for the book?
Oh my goodness, no.
Okay, I want to hear what the most shocking thing was.
Oh, is this a G-rated program?
Sure. Really?
We're speechless because there's so many like very, very odd parts of Christian culture that try to create gendered messages.
Waiting for Boaz, right? For example, when we started this, we had no idea that there were waiting for Boaz groups, and Melanie started finding them on Facebook
and Pinterest too, right?
and so, yeah, it's just
yeah. Explain more. Yeah, what is a Waiting for Boaz group? You have a chapter in the book,
right.
So Waiting for Boaz, Boaz, it turns out, is the perfect Christian man that every young person, every young woman should wait for. It's kind of like the Christian Prince Charming. So a lot of Christian young people say they're waiting for their Boaz, or they're waiting for the perfect man to come into their life. And there's Facebook pages and Pinterest pages where young women talk about waiting for their Boaz, and actually put up pins in the Pinterest sites of things that they will do once they meet their Boaz and get married. So what their Boaz will wear, what the bedroom will look like that their Boaz will sleep in with them.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you think about the Boaz of the Bible, he doesn't really seem like that much of a catch. Compared to, Kendra talks about him being an older man. He's very wealthy, so I guess it would be kind of like a sugar daddy or something. Kendra deconstructs that understanding of Boaz and helps us understand the Ruth story from a different perspective that I think calls into question all the Waiting for Boaz products that people try to sell.
Yeah. And that's a terrific illustration of kind of someone twisting the Bible to sell a message, right? Because Boaz could never be an exemplar of a Christian man, because of course the story is from the Old Testament. So it was much before the beginnings of Christian tradition. And so just even from that perspective, it's twisting the narrative. And I think, too, to kind of put the emphasis on Boaz as opposed to Ruth and Naomi, also kind of shifts the narrative in ways that I think take away from perhaps what might be some of the most helpful insights from the book itself.
Right. Yes. And that gets to your point about helping evangelicals to understand the context in which these biblical stories were taking place, and how to properly really understand them. That was a big part of my experience growing up as an evangelical is sort of seemingly random things from Scripture being sort of universalized and saying this is, just taken out of context and kind of made, this is for all time. This is super important and kind of, set apart. Well, tell us about the subtitle to the book. I know this piece about becoming all God means for you to be. It has some special significance for you both. Where does that come from?
Well, we dedicate the book to Letha Dawson Scanzoni and the Sisters of Summer, which refers to the EEWC group, of which Letha was one of the founding members. Letha, along with a co-author, Nancy Hardesty, wrote a groundbreaking book several years ago called All We're Meant to Be. And so in our subtitle, we're echoing that book because we wanted to draw attention to, I guess, not only that this has been an ongoing conversation, and that Letha herself has been writing and talking and sharing this message of being all we're meant to be. But it goes on, and that I think what we wanted to say is that we don't think that we are, as human beings, called to live into specific roles. And instead, we think that God has gifted each one of us uniquely, and that that part of what we need to be about is embracing those gifts and living into them, as opposed to kind of trying to live up to a particular role.
Mm. That's great. I was going to ask this question maybe a little bit later, but I'm curious, who are some of the other kind of influences or heroes of the faith that have kind of inspired both of you, or folks that you have read and studied that have championed sort of a more feminist theology that folks really ought to know?
I would definitely say Letha Dawson-Scanzoni is one of those people for me. I actually did not read a lot of feminist theology. I haven't. That's not really my background. But I met Letha at EEWC, which is Evangelical and Ecumenical Women's Caucus, or Christian Feminism Today. I met her at a conference in 2011, 2012, and found her own story really powerful, and her desire to equip and help people find their gifts has been really important to me. She's been a huge encouragement to me in that way.
That's great.
Letha has certainly encouraged me as well, but I might also just mention someone that wouldn't be well known at all, but she helped me quite a bit, and her name was Madeline Southern. And she was a woman that I included in a couple chapters in my PhD dissertation. And one of the things that really stood out about Madeline Southern to me was that she wrote a master's thesis in 1919 about Jesus and how he treated women. And when I went back and I read that, I was amazed at the work that she had done, just going through the Gospels, taking each of those accounts where Jesus interacts with a woman, where she took it seriously and reflected on what those encounters teach us about who Jesus was. And she's been overlooked in history. If you read very many biblical scholars, they're not going to quote Madeline Southern. They're not going to even know that she wrote this back in 1919. But they were echoing things in the 70s and the 80s that I saw that she had written many years before that. And so when I was doing my research on Madeline Southern, that really kind of struck a chord with me. And so when I began to teach my courses on the Bible, I drew heavily from the insights that I had gained from her.
Mm. Wow, that's really cool.
I think I would add that for me, since I haven't read a lot of theology, my growth or development as a feminist has a lot to do with teachers that I've had in my life. Some of them who aren't even people of faith. My MA advisor at University of Missouri, St. Louis, Sally Ebest, was huge in helping me nurture my own feminist identity, even though, she's written on feminism and Catholicism, but isn't really known as a feminist theologian. And I have to say, I think my mom too, even though she was a Mennonite minister's wife, so she didn't have a huge voice, but she allowed me to be who I needed to be, even though that kind of rubbed against the expectations of a Mennonite pastor's daughter. She really helped me become who I wanted to be.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I was curious. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm thinking of something I wanted to ask earlier when we were talking about the Boaz story. and kind of how that's been pulled out of context, and the sort of the impact that has on women who have been told, you wait and look for this kind of man, and this kind of man is going to complete your life or something. That also has theological implications on men who have that sort of expectation put on them that you need to be this kind of Boaz type character, right? And that's so one of the things that people might think, well, this book is primarily for women, but there's a lot of great things in here for men as well to understand and to deconstruct and to think about and wrestle with as well, that Boaz piece, and how it impacts men, right?
I think that's true. And, one of the things that I noticed, especially when I was teaching here at George Fox with men who were taking my Bible courses, was that, I started to realize that they were carrying this really heavy sense of burden, that they would have to be this, great spiritual leader, right? So part of what they needed to be about was getting geared up for that, so that as soon as they're married, they're able to kind of take on this mantle of leadership. And, and for many of them, that wouldn't be natural. It wouldn't be kind of who they were. And so, I think that these messages do similar kinds of harm for men, just as they do for women. And so, for example, we include a chapter in the book on, the Macho Jesus.
Mm. Yeah, let's talk about the Macho Jesus. I wanted to ask you about that. That is one of the things that, we've seen it in recent years with, and there was just another story of an evangelical megachurch pastor who comes out of this sort of particular theological tradition, not getting fired for sexual impropriety, but sort of other kinds of misconduct related to just sort of being this sort of domineering, controlling person. And that was sort of the story of Mark Driscoll, who was the pastor at Mars Hill Church in Seattle. It wasn't, he ended up leaving, and that church ended up breaking up, not over, money being embezzled or some kind of sexual scandal, but just he was a big, mean guy driven by this sort of macho theology, right? So yeah, talk a little bit more about that and what you say in the book and how you kind of approach that and address that.
Yeah, well, we spend a chapter talking about the Christian masculinity movement, of which Mark Driscoll was one of the leaders, and it's called the Affinity Ministries, where churches, to try to get men to come into their congregations, will hold events like barbecues or camping trips or adventure experiences, or one church somewhere out in the South, I assume, was having a gun drawing. If people would come to the church, they would have a drawing for a gun, because men apparently enjoy shooting guns. And there's so many problems with this kind of affinity ministry that says this is what men will do, this is what men will like to do, because they are built that way. Then something inherently about men makes them warrior-like and into adventure and camping and things like that. Because if we look at the ministry of Jesus, it would be really hard to imagine Jesus actually wanting to pick up a gun and blow somebody's head off as a way of expressing his ministry. And we talk about how those messages can be extremely damaging for men, especially if they don't fit that stereotype of what a godly man needs to look like. When I talk about my book at several public occasions here at George Fox University, I use the example of my husband and my colleagues here at George Fox, many of them who are deeply committed believers, but do not really fit the warrior stereotype, and would prefer probably an evening of poetry or going to the symphony to going out into the woods and acting like a warrior. But the church tells them to be a man of God, you have to be a warrior type. That's the way God made you. So it's a conflicting messages for men as well as for women about who God means for them to be.
Mm.
And many of these, so-called ministries are really looking at physical strength, right? And kind of holding that up as what it means to be strong. And so one of the things that we try to point out in this chapter is that if you take the life of Jesus seriously, he's very strong, but it's not in necessarily that way. That his strength is an inner strength and a continual commitment to compassion and to justice, and to reaching out to those on the margins of society. And so to emulate Jesus, I think, isn't about building physical strength, but it's about doing those things. What does it mean to have compassion for my neighbor? What does it mean for me to go and welcome the stranger? Because I think if we do take Jesus seriously, that's what we're called to do. And that is strong.
Absolutely. And I just have to think that this idea of a certain kind of masculinity, again, is not biblical, but it is something that churches are bringing in from popular culture and then putting this sort of Christian veneer on it or something, and presenting it to people and saying, this is how you need to be a strong Christian man.
Right, and one of those, you asked us a while back what some of the odder things that we found in our research was, and one of those was the Christian fight clubs that have emerged in some churches where they do, as part of the men's ministry, they do mixed martial arts and cage fighting, believing that that's an expression of Jesus's strength. And there's t-shirts that say Jesus did not tap out, meaning that, Jesus did not give up on the cross in the same way that these men fighting in cages aren't supposed to give up even unto death. So it's just one of those odd ways that they're trying to bring men into the church, and teach them something that seems to me antithetical to Jesus and his ministry. Right.
Wow. Yeah, to go back to that example of Mark Driscoll, who is probably the, big national news when all of that happened, and he was someone who had said he was a huge fan of mixed martial arts, and talked about Jesus, coming back, with a sword, a bloody sword, to get people at the final judgment or whatever. He had this very image of big muscular Jesus, and my mainline Protestant friends just again shake their head at that, going, where is that coming from? But then you see it again with this case of Darren Patrick in St. Louis, in his church, and it is, I think, this sort of insidious theology that is in a lot of the evangelical megachurch culture, which again is male pastors who have sort of their I'll just say it here. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. We've got Stephen Furtick, the pastor of Elevation Church. His salary is not determined by the church, but by a board of other male megachurch pastors around the country. So they have their little club, and they're I think that's something we're going to, unfortunately, I don't take any pleasure in this, but we're going to see more and more of these evangelical megachurches implode like this, because there's that theology that's driving the leaders of these churches. So I'm really glad that the Masculine Jesus is one of the things that you take on and you talk about in the book. So on that happy note, what has been some of the response as you've been talking to different groups now that the book has been out? What's some of the feedback that you guys have begun to receive from folks?
Well, I hear kind of two different refrains. One is for those who are not part of evangelical culture, kind of the shock about the messages and how prevalent and persistent they are, and so they're just not aware of that. I was meeting with a group in Keller, Texas a few weeks ago, and it was a terrific group because I had women of all ages in the group, and then I also had 4 young women, and those young women all had at one time or another attended a private Christian school. And so when we met initially, some of the older women who had been part of a mainline church all their lives, they arrived first, and so we started talking a little bit about what we'd read that week, and they just didn't believe what we had in the book. They'd been in the church all their lives, and they're like, I just didn't hear this, so I'm not sure that this is really how it is. Well, then those 4 younger women came in, all having had this private Christian school experience, and they were able to actually affirm that what we said in the book was true, and especially the prevalence of the purity culture. And so those women talked about how on just a very regular basis, they were getting this message about purity. And so to watch these older women on the one hand be kind of shocked, but then really starting to hear what the younger women had to say was quite fascinating, and opened their eyes to kind of what was going on. And then the second refrain that I hear is, I've never looked at these figures in the Bible before. I've seldom hear anyone preach about them, and I've never thought about them this way. And so that's been a lot of fun, to get people to really kind of open up their imaginations and begin to really engage the Bible in perhaps a new way that they hadn't done before. And so those are kind of the 2 refrains that I've heard quite a bit.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. Like I spoke at a Methodist church here in Tigard, Oregon, and the evangelical women in the group said, absolutely, this is the way it was. And the mainline Protestant women said, I have no frame of reference for what you're talking about, and being shocked when they hear from other women that, yes, this is really how it is. And then speaking to Christian young people, especially Christian young women, I've had people tell me that they're grateful for this message because they feel silenced, or they feel like they aren't able to explore their vocation as they would want to because of their families or because of their church tradition. And that it's refreshing for them to hear a different message, that one that can be empowering, that gives them a voice and an opportunity maybe to lean into what their calling really is.
Mm. That's great. So it sounds like there's some good, excellent fodder in here for pastors to maybe get start preaching some new and different kinds of sermons, and maybe get some of that biblical education going in our churches.
I would hope so. I mean, one of the things that happened for me and comes out in a certain place in the book is, what happens to what we think about Sarah and Abraham if we take Hagar's story seriously, and if we shift our attention from Sarah and Abraham to Hagar. How does that kind of perhaps reveal something that maybe we hadn't seen before? And so I think that for pastors, I think there are nuggets in there that are worth exploring from the pulpit, and helping people to see a plethora of messages in the Bible, and not just kind of a one note.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, and wrapping up here. Any other sort of closing thoughts? You two are, I don't know how often you get to be together and spend time together like this, being in the same place. And I'm sure that all kinds of sparks are flying, and there's great ideas and stuff coming out of your conversations there. Yeah, what kind of what's on your hearts or minds right now as you think about this book and these messages and these ideas and trying to get these get this out there? It seems like there's a huge task, right? With that education piece and helping people on both sides of the evangelical and mainline Protestant worlds to understand each other and understand things better.
What I think is on my mind now, we're coming to the end of a semester here at George Fox University, and for some of my students that will mean graduation. And I think of where I was when I graduated from college now, almost 30 years ago. I graduated from George Fox. It was a college then, super evangelical. I graduated with a sense of failure because I had not found a spouse as I was supposed to, apparently, according to the messages of the popular culture at that time. And that I was going out into the world with not a real clear sense of vocation and calling, feeling like I had, God did not find favor with me because I was not graduating with the one. So now as my students go out into the world, I just want them to feel empowered and feel strong and feel like God is going to give them a calling and a vocation that they will feel grateful for and that they will love for the rest of their lives. And that if they are not graduating with a ring by spring, that they are not a failure, but that they can walk out into the world and just really enjoy their 20s, enjoy exploring who they are, and not feel this immense pressure to live up to the expectations that they've heard from Christian culture. So that's what's on my mind and my heart right now as we move to the end of the semester.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking that, Diana Butler Bass has a new book out called Grounded. And one of the things that she talks about is that she thinks that perhaps we are undergoing a significant reformation, that this is perhaps a very critical shift in Christian history. And so one of the things I wonder about is if she's right, then this is a time in which we need to be out there helping people to understand the Bible and to understand each other. And if we can be part of that conversation and help everyone to have a seat at that table, I think that what we look like going forward will be much more of a justice-oriented community than perhaps we have been, and certainly perhaps is represented by this evangelical culture that kind of is promoting these warped messages. So I think it's kind of a time that's pretty exciting, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of shifts do in fact occur.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you, Kendra and Melanie, again for your time this evening. The book is If Eve Only Knew. And I want to let folks out there who are watching know that you can get 30% off the book at chalicepress.com with coupon code IFEVE16. So we've set that up for folks who have been watching this evening, and we'll see this. This video will be archived on the Chalice Press YouTube page. We hope people will watch it again. We'll share it and take advantage of that special offer. And look for more. We'll be doing more of these live stream conversations coming up, and we'll be promoting those through Chalice Press on Facebook. And tell us how we can keep in touch with both of you. Kendra, Melanie.
Contact me through email at inlock@georgefox.edu, or read about us on the blog, Ain't I a Woman?
And my email is kirons@texwest.edu.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you both again for tonight. And this has been a great conversation. And it's a great book. So pick up a copy. And and I guess I can announce that it's been selected by the United Methodist Women's Reading Group as a selection for 2017. So which will be announced by them soon. So that's pretty exciting.
That's great.
There are a lot of United Methodist women, and they read, and so it's a great thing.
Excellent.
So awesome. Thank you both again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.